Paul, you had this to say about the president's comments. Quote, his speech sounded more like a campaign speech by a divider, not a uniter, by a partisan, not a president. It tells me the president's not interested in learning from economic mistakes, but rather is set on repeating them. Explain that, if you will, Paul.
Sure. Well, when you come to a town with 14% unemployment rate and say the stimulus is working, you just don't know it. That tells me that they're trying to double down with the same economic medicine, which since stimulus passed, we've lost 3.6 million jobs. Stimulus was purported to keep unemployment below 8%, and we're around 10% nationwide. So, you know what? It's always good when you have the president come to your district. It's exciting to have the commander-in-chief come to your area. But what we got was a campaigner-in-chief. And so I was really kind of taken aback at how harsh and partisan his words were. That is far from bringing the country together, you know, red state, blue state, United States. What we got was demagoguery and a campaign speech. And these straw man arguments, which try to affix to your opponent's views they don't have, and then knocking down those views, is really intellectually just not a strong argument.
You said the president engaged in demagoguery. Give me an example of that. What did he say?
Well, when you say that Republicans are for the status quo on financial reform, they don't want to do this or want to do that, they like the status quo, that's not true. I don't know anybody who thinks the financial services sector should go on like they were. We just have a huge problem with this huge power grab in this bill. We want the economy to turn around, and there's lots of things that we've been proposing to turn this economy around.
Okay, specifically,
we don't want
Paul,
high joblessness.
All right, specifically, Paul, what did you not like about this financial services reform bill that passed yesterday?
Specifically, what I don't like is it takes the too big to fail doctrine and amplifies it. It has this new power by the federal government to designate interconnected big firms like Citigroup as systemically risky. What that in turn does is it turns them into Fannie Mae and Freddie Macs. The other specific concern I have is it left Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac alone. It didn't do anything to fix Fannie and Freddie. It makes the big institutions bigger at the expense of smaller businesses and medium-sized businesses. And so what I think it does is it exacerbates the problems we had. It will lead to more taxpayer bailouts, more moral hazard, and it gives us a new doctrine of crony capitalism, which is where I think we should not be going.
You know, Paul, I was going to do what I try to do here. We did it to poor Eric Cantor a couple of days ago, where I played devil's advocate and we push. But unfortunately, you waved the bloody flag for me of Fannie and Freddie. I am outraged that Congress and the White House could talk about reforming our financial sector and yet not try to reform Fannie and Freddie, right, two institutions that keep bleeding money. The big banks on Wall Street have paid back the money with interest, but these Fannie and Freddie keep bleeding money, and also they were there at the beginning. We're in Chicago. They were the cow that kicked over the lantern that started the Chicago fire.
Yes.
Why was Fannie and Freddie not touched in this reform package? It seems outrageous to me.
We have never gotten a good answer to that. We're already $400 billion in the red on taxpayer money. The $5.4 trillion in Fannie and Freddie debt is now our debt, the federal government's debt, and they're sweeping all these toxic assets into it, and they're not even giving us clear accounting on Fannie. We've sent letters to Geithner saying, give us a look at the books so we understand what's going on with respect to taxpayers and moral hazard. We've had crickets. So I think they think Fannie and Freddie is a new tool that they can use for policy under the management of the Treasury Department, and they're not even touching it. So we have real reasons why we're against this bill, not because we like what happened before. That's why I say these strawman arguments are just so intellectually dishonest and disingenuous. We ought to have a real honest debate, and when your president comes to your area, you hope that he comes with aspiration. You hope that he's inspiring and not picking partisan fights with other people. That poisons the atmosphere in Washington and makes it more partisan, not less partisan.
We've got Mark Halperin with MSNBC, senior political analyst, and with Time Magazine here, and he's got a question. Mark.
Congressman, I know you wanted Freddie and Fannie in there, and that's a totally reasonable position. The White House says they'll take that up eventually. Do you think that if this bill passes, that it will, on balance, hurt the economy without question? And if so, will it hurt it in the short term in a way that you think will affect the midterm elections?
Yeah, I do. I think what it'll do is end up tightening up credit. It will actually restrict credit further and make it more expensive. In Wisconsin, you know, businesses get their money from small and medium-sized banks. We don't get it from the big banks. And what it will do is it'll give cheaper money to the big banks, more expensive money to the small and medium-sized banks, and it will more restrict credit. And it will also politicize credit like we had in the run-up to the bubble. So I do think it will hurt the economy in the short term in the form of tightening credit. There are far better ways to do this. We've proposed alternatives to financial services reform. Unfortunately, those alternatives were quickly discarded, and the majority wrote their own bill on their own, just like they did with health care.
All right, let's go to Mika's love interest at 30 Rock. Donnie Deutsch. Donnie, do you have a question for Paul Ryan?
Yeah, I find it interesting. You're kind of going after my man Obama as far as being too political and coming in and being divisive. I don't know that Boehner comment about the financial reform and going after the ant. I thought the financial crisis was a little bit more of an ant problem, and I thought it was a very just response. I thought the president looked very presidential. I'm not quite sure where the divisiveness comes from that you're talking about.
Well, first of all, I think he took his metaphor out of context.
I thought it was very much in context. It was exactly in context.
The metaphor was designed to say that this is a huge overreach of government in the wrong direction. But I'm looking at all the other things that he said in his speech, which was basically saying that your opponents, what a straw man argument is you set up your opponent as standing for something which he doesn't stand for, and then you knock that down. That's what he did on issue after issue after issue. In addition to this ant comment, I think you're right. The metaphor is easily confused, but the fact remains the president came as a campaigner, as a partisan, not as a commander-in-chief, with new ideas that we've learned from mistakes of the past on how to get our economy going. Look, we have 14% unemployment in the city of Racine. We've lost 3 auto factories just in that very area, in that region. And the stimulus is not working. We lost 73,000 jobs in Wisconsin alone.
Congressman, the stimulus in a lot of ways is working. My question to you is, without the stimulus and without any aid, and obviously we've got the deficit issue, and a lot of Republicans are saying we should be tightening our belt. I go back to my old friend Herbert Hoover. Aren't we kind of creating possibly more of a disaster? I'm not saying the stimulus was a overall panacea and cures all, but wasn't it a step in the right direction and at least maybe a Band-Aid, and wouldn't we be in a worse situation without it?
Herbert Hoover did the same exact thing. He did the same kind of stimulus spending, then FDR built on top of that. So he did the same mistakes that we're making now. What we should be doing is not raising taxes on small businesses and entrepreneurs and investors. Huge wave of tax increase in 2011, another wave of taxes in 2013. And what you have is more uncertainty in the economy, uncertainty on credit, uncertainty on taxes, uncertainty on regulations. And it's this big overhang of uncertainty that is making it harder for businesses to plan for the future, so they're sitting on their hands. I met with a business person in Racine with 1,000 employees 2 weeks ago who was telling me, because of this health care bill and the taxes associated with it, he thinks he has to shut down his company and lay off 1,000 people. That's in Racine right there. So all the taxes, regulations, spending, borrowing, high interest rates, and all of this uncertainty is what is hurting jobs. Stimulus didn't do the job, and what we're doing now is actually making it harder for us to grow the economy and create jobs.
Well, and Paul, you talk about straw men being set up. The president, while you were debating the stimulus package, set up one straw man after another, saying the Republicans don't want to do anything. The Republicans don't want to spend a dime. The Republicans don't. And he kept doing that. There wasn't a real debate, so Democrats got the stimulus bill that Nancy Pelosi wanted. It seems to me that they can't go out now and say, oh, but we had to pass this stimulus bill or else the economy would have collapsed, because there was no real debate about what type of stimulus bill you passed. One more great example of remember the president saying Republicans don't want to do anything, and if you don't pass Nancy Pelosi's stimulus bill, the economy collapses, and he says we may never recover, but if you pass it, well, then unemployment will never rise above 8%. That's the danger of these straw man arguments. You don't have a real debate.
That's right, and then you're easily disproved. The other thing is, during that time when he said that, we brought a stimulus bill, an alternative to the floor, which, using the president's chief economist's own data, would have created twice the amount of jobs at half the cost. And so we tried to engage the president with other ideas.
Why hasn't this stimulus bill worked, Paul? I'm sorry to interrupt. Why hasn't this bill worked?
Keynesian stimulus does not work. We've proven this over and over again. Borrowing more money, mostly from foreigners, and sprinkling it around the economy. It will create a few jobs in the meantime, but it gives us a huge debt hangover. And now we're courting our own debt crisis like you see in Europe, because it looks like we're going on a tear. We are borrowing and spending with no limits. This year, the House is not even doing a budget. So Congress isn't even doing a budget. We're spending with no restraints. That puts jitters in the economy and the credit markets. That gives us more uncertainty. That's hurting us to create jobs.
We've got to go, but really quickly, Mark Halperin, Keynesian economics is dead in Europe. You look what's happening in Great Britain, what's happening in Germany, what's happening in France, even in Belgium. Is America next?
I hate to say it, but the Germans are telling us to cut spending. I mean, the Europeans are lecturing us that this Keynesian stuff doesn't work.
That's what I'm saying. Keynesian economics is dead in Europe. Mark Halperin is America next.
We are next in February of March of 2011 when Paul Ryan goes to the White House and does a grand bargain with the president to reform Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other spending programs in a huge way that will put our fiscal responsibilities in the future back in line with what kind of receipts we can expect. I look forward to that.
Paul